Okay, I'm going to do one on tsunamis and ancient floods and disasters. Yeah, I know. Just try to stick with me on this. For this guy here's compiled a couple of them together, and I can do my thing where I'll add something to this. One question of thought, you can see this little person that's here now going running fast as he can from the impending danger. And this might remind one of recent tsunamis and how the sea had sucked out from that area, and people went out like looking and seeing starfish and things exposed, and then all of a sudden came in this huge wall. But it wasn't near this big, but we saw the destruction that it caused. And you wonder if this is a sunset on a new age or a sunset on the ending of an old age. For in many tales, it is the sunset of an old age and the dawning of a new age. And I'll kind of go into that a little bit too, in mythology and folklore. I won't do it completely as much. I hope this doesn't go into two parts, but if it does, part two's up in your top left-hand corner always. Now, one interesting fact to put into mind too, at different times, this would have been a different looking appearance. You can see that this runs up to a mountain here. And the ocean was some 420 foot lower at Ice Age and rapidly rose from that, from a great catastrophe happening. They got it up close to that, and after the Younger Dryas event, up until 8,000 years or so, apparently between 8 and 6,500 years ago, which that number should come up again in our conversation tonight, you'll see that there was perhaps another event that helped to make it go up the rest of the way to where it is now, and this staggering event. And we've looked at ice cores and things, and we can tell that this has happened many times before, and a lot of times when we weren't even on the planet, and the cycles that it goes through and so on, and today's modern day fear mongering. But let's just go ahead and start getting into this, and we can discuss it. For the title he gave was Creating Waves, Destroying Lives, Ancient Tsunamis That Left Their Mark. The catastrophic Indian Ocean tsunami of late 2004 claimed up to 300,000 lives total in the space of 24 hours. In 2011, the Japanese tsunami claimed another 20,000 lives. Prior to these events, few scientists were interested in studying tsunamis, as they were believed that they were very rare events and perhaps some of them mythological in the first place. An exception is Professor Ted Bryan of Wollongong University, who has discovered that tsunamis regularly inundated the Pacific coast during Australia's prehistory, the last event occurring in as early as 1491, literally the year before the Americas were found. And he's just done a study on that, and I might dig into that and see what I can get. For us, Australia's a pretty flat area, and surely whenever a tsunami had happened, it would inundate it quite badly and rapidly. Now, this we're talking about tonight, the following tsunami is a selection of ancient tsunamis which have occurred during the era of human habitation and may have been responsible for millions of deaths around the world. All occurred during prehistoric times, but left tsunami signatures of debris along coastlines that we can find and still see today, in sediment paths and things along that line. Let's start out with one that kind of hits home to begin with. The 6000 BC earthquake and tsunami in the Mediterranean. In November 2006, scientists reported that a massive tsunami triggered by a debris avalanche from Mount Etna in Sicily ravaged the eastern Mediterranean about 8,000 years ago, or 6000 BC in our timeline. And here's a look of just still the destroyed field of Mount Etna. And we talked about Mount Etna being the place of Typhon and the destroyer, and so on, the red-headed god, and how that all connects back to primordial. I mean, way, probably a belief system that was in Neanderthals and Cro-Mags, and, well, no, way even before that, of lava and magma gods and volcanoes and burping out this fiery orange-red hair, if you will, and their destruction that they burp up, and how those spewed out pieces come and hit the earth all over the place like meteorites and so on. And we realize now that a huge volcano going off like that, even in an unknown part of the world, can totally affect the whole world. Yeah, like Krakatoa had done back in the day and so on. Let's just continue here, though. Mount Etna avalanche sent 6 cubic miles or 25 cubic kilometers worth of rock and sediment tumbling into the water at more than 200 miles per hour. So it was a lahar. That's 322 kilometers per hour for y'all over in the UK across the pond. By the way, this pond between us has been rocked quite a few times, and real close, and on the other side, and where y'all are down there on the other side, yeah, and over down towards India, yeah, it's affected everywhere. We're only going to talk about a few of these. But it tumbled in the water fast, rapidly, at over 200 miles an hour. Pummeling the seabed, it transformed thick layers of soft marine sediment into jelly, triggering an underwater mudslide. Researchers at the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanoes in Italy used some sonar-equipped boats to survey the Ionian seafloor sediment displaced by the avalanche. And I wish I had the little 3D sonar thing and a few pictures of that for you, but it basically shows you that there's this huge area that had let loose. And I have found some of those myself just on Google Earth and going around, and you're like, look, all of a sudden this area, it's just like meh, so that caused something. I did a video about it about two and a half years ago now, where I'm zooming around and finding some weird structures and things on Google Earth, and then there's this place where you can see this weird structure-y thing, and then it's just half of it's covered up with bleh. It had gone away, but also it's down below the ocean, but not too deep. In fact, might have been exposed during the last ice age. I continue. They suggest that the tsunami reached heights of up to 165 feet, or 51 meters. You can imagine how high. Okay, so the one that we talk about, and you see that happened in the Sumatran one that happens there, it was probably 35, 40 foot in some places, but quickly receded off of that. In most others, it was 20 foot. The Japanese one was pushing around that same range at its most heights, but really wasn't doing that. And you could see how it inundates houses and just push them, just wrecked through that entire area, if you've seen any of that footage at all. But they suggest that the tsunami reached heights of up to 165 foot in Sicily and Italy within 15 minutes of the avalanche. There was not much of any warning whatsoever. At speeds of 450 miles per hour, or 720 kilometers for y'all across the pond, the tsunami would have swamped Greece and Libya with a 43-foot tall, 13-meter high wave an hour later. After devastating the Greek islands and Turkey, or Anatolia, or Asia Minor, depending on, well, during the time we would have been going in that way. Hattusha, and no, actually at this age, but the waves would have reached Egypt and Israel in just over 3 hours, and that changed the entire Mediterranean. And I tell you, there were ancient people living around real close and on the Mediterranean at that time, and Greeks and stuff in their mythology, and a few others, which I've pointed out, show this idea and this Po of Sidon, and there's still Sidon that's there today in Phoenician, ancient Phoenician lands, and this phoenix that had rose from the flames, and things that had happened in ancient times. And it had happened more than once, and we're going to talk about another one here shortly. But yeah, this was quite a devastating event for sure. Now, 8,000 years ago, the shorelines of the Mediterranean were about 30 foot lower than present, which comprises the identification of such tsunami deposits. However, a sunken Neolithic site called Atit Yam in Israel, which was suddenly abandoned 8,000 years ago, has been identified as a possible victim of the tsunami. And we talked about that. And Yam is the god of the sea of the ancient Canaanites. Yam that gets killed, it's just like Leviathan that gets killed in the same way as pretty much the apex snake gets killed in that ancient symbology that you see in Egypt with them fighting the crocodiles, but usually hippos, right? But that actually has something to do with a fight that happened long ago between rivals and somewhat brothers of Seth, the red-headed type god that goes with Typhon, by the way, and all of this religion across there, and an ancient remembrance of somehow. And he turned into a hippo, and he was fighting his brother Horus, and there's a bunch of things that go along with that. But if you've ever heard this story, and that's part of their mythology, but it's funny that it mentions Yam, and it's abandoned about this exact same time. Recorded of ancient events, tsunamis found in Indonesian cave. I'm all over it. I'll see if I can get anything worthwhile to give y'all. Quest for mythical submerged temples in Malabarapatan. Oh, I'm all over it. And we're going to hook that with the ancient city of Jarpa and some Dwarka, or whichever way you want to pronounce it, and things like that. That would show things too. 10 sensational sunken kingdoms. Atlantis companions beneath the waves. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. But there's 10 of them he's got on that one. Wow, you can guarantee there's going to be a multi-part out of this, guys. So there are these sites too that's interesting, but like I've shown you recently, there's this Bob Ballard thing that shows that over 300 foot below the surface in the Aegean Sea, when they were looking for World War I stuff, shows, hey, here's a crop circle. Kind of a Stonehenge kind of looking deal with over 20-foot walls and so on, a deal in the middle, and that had to be exposed whenever they built that. And the only way you'd find it is because it was on a shore, but on a shore that long ago, where they could have built it there. And so if this sea level was down at 8,000 years ago and there was a lot of stuff around this area, wham, it would take it out real bad, wouldn't it? Hopefully I've put it out before this video, but I'm showing a site that's in ancient Israel. Yeah, and it's near Wadi Ari, and they're starting to name it Megalopolis. And it appears that they had this city that was much more advanced than they gave anybody before in this area, even perhaps in Jericho and even sites like that they had more advanced looking cities for marketing and trade and so on like that. But it also shows an inundation that had happened, and wham, and then pretty much they continued after that, though. But there's a question on dating that, and that's what I'm kind of waiting on, is the dating on that and what had happened and at what area and what level and things, because there was a 7,000-year-old site that apparently was almost obliterated, but there are remnants definitely there, and then another giant city was built there in that place that flourished and went crazy. Yeah, and this would correspond to the times of Cronus and things that we talk about so much. Here's another site that's been found here, and this one is Adet Lam that we were talking about, Adet Yam, submerged by a tsunami. and there's ancient stone pillars that stick up and everything, so this would have been something of that age. And we also know now, of course, that in this same area, Alexandria and the ancient lighthouse and like Faroe Island and all that stuff sunk, and they say scooted out and sunk in the waters too, and that's very much like an Atlantean tale. So there's a few of those though, in this destruction in less than 24 hours. Well, hell, these volcanoes, when they let loose on you, once it let loose, that stuff hits you within 24 hours. If you are in visual or hearing distance, it's going to hit you within 24 hours. Even if you hear it off in the far, far distance, if it's water and it's made a tsunami, it will hit you within 24 hours. Those waves are incredibly powerful and fast, and they get a subservient wave going on with them. And then whenever that hits a rising up land that has an apex at this angle, it just takes and pushes it straight up. So as he mentions, any settlements on the coast of northern Italy, Malta, Tunisia, and western Greece or Libya would have been completely annihilated by the towering waves. Like if that guy was right there around the city that we started the video on. Many thousands of people must have been killed by this event, which was even more catastrophic than the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. Banda Aceh is the name of that place that it happened from. I was getting fish at that time from Bali and Jakarta and a few places there and the South China Sea, and all of it got disrupted except for Philippines wasn't affected so much, although they said they were working on the leeward and outward sides of the islands and things. But it got affected definitely there, all the way to our Red Sea trade and so on, Indian Ocean, all of that, and Bali, Jakarta, Sulawesi. In that whole area, there were stories that some of these people had collection sites that were very close to the beach and not too high above sea level, and they were totally washed away. Yeah, the site that was the collection site for some of the fish and corals and stuff were totally washed away because they were only 30 foot above sea level, less than a couple of hundred yards from the shore, with a boat dock right out there that no longer existed either. So let's go on here to Santorini tsunami, because it's kind of important. It destroyed the Minoans, and a lot of people believe that this is the story of Atlantis and just multiplied in time and its scope a little bit by Plato, and of course recanting against what he had heard from Solon, an ancestor in Egypt. The Santorini tsunami that destroyed the Minoans, about 1600 BC, the volcanic eruption of Thera in the Aegean caused massive tsunamis which inundated the Mediterranean and may have been instrumental in the demise of the Minoan culture. The exact date was not recorded in historical records, but scientists are able to study core samples and tree rings, while archaeologists are able to date the Minoan settlement of Akrotiri on Santorini, which was covered with feet or meters full of ash during the eruption. So it pretty much encased it, just like Pompeii had done, and they go, well, when did it exactly happen? And they can get real, real close. By the way, you know that they found on the wall of Pompeii a dating that apparently somebody scribbled down when they knew it was all going bad or something, because it dates from a little bit later date than even what Pliny and others had originally tabulated and talked about. So this is some of these volcanic hills, but it wouldn't have looked like that, and it makes you wonder what's up under that. Some areas there has to be something that's still left of what's left of it was washed away. And that's the caldera there in Santorini. Prior to the eruption on the existing island Nea Kameni, which is the center of the now mostly collapsed caldera, if you've looked at it, it's kind of a three-quarters ring, and then there's an island in the center of that. But that was a giant island at one time that was a volcano, and people all lived on it, and they just blew the top off the whole thing and blew the sides out of it and stuff. And Not only was it a cause for great concern for it, but the entire Mediterranean and the ash that happened out of it, they find all the way across the world pretty much. Thera was a much larger island then. It was estimated that the late Bronze Age eruption had a volcanic explosivity index of 6 or 7, which ejected the equivalent of 14 cubic miles or 60 cubic kilometers of rock and ash into the atmosphere alone. Scientists believe that the eruption occurred over 4 phases. Intense eruption of magma and ash with up to 23 foot or 7 meters of pumice was deposited on the island, like what was seen in Pompeii, but then it let loose a lahar and covered it all up too, which happens also. Towns like Akrotiri were buried. Pyroclastic flows and the lava fountaining as well as tsunamis were generated. Initiation of the caldera's collapse. Lava and lahar flows on Thera and collapse of caldera, creating mega tsunamis in the southern Mediterranean, and probably reached all the way across it, knowing the effect of it. And funny how it didn't quite get recorded exactly, knowing its dating. It wasn't that much early BC, and things were already happening. Shortly after that, there's, the sea people show up out of nowhere and so on. And maybe it seemed to them like a great catastrophe, and they kept it that way, and the problem was more of the people and the things that had happened than the destruction themselves. But, so Crete, 62 miles from Thera, suffered tsunamis reaching up to 92 foot in height. So you can bet in that direction, past that too, it inundated everywhere and up quite some distance. And then anywhere that fingered up into it would have gotten shoved up and pushed. Yeah. And you'd have that Japanese tsunami thing not happening right near the beach, but happening way inland. Like some of it did there, but I'm talking much, much worse. Each one of these is much, much worse in amplitude than that is, but still nothing to sneeze about or not to forget or to understand. We've put these meters out in the ocean too that can detect their self now, that stay in position pretty much and float, and they register themselves off satellites, and whenever something radical happens, they go did, and there's enough of them pretty much in areas that if something happens in that area, it puts off a warning. They just need to get more of them in place, and I believe they're in the process of doing that now and pretty much covering the planet with that idea. And also the way of bouncing radar, even in fact off of the ocean, and a regular pulse every now and then. But that requires a lot of power versus the other type of deals that are something more planetary and easy to work on and don't have to rely so much on that. Crete, which is 62 miles away from Thera, suffered tsunamis reaching 92 feet, 28 meters in height during the final caldera collapse, with inundations reaching 1,476 feet or 450 meters inland in some areas. Archaeological sites such as Ammonosis, Pisidia, and Palacrostro suffered damage from the volcano and tsunamis. Sedimentary deposits from the eruption may also have been identified in southwest Turkey, the Cyclades, Cyprus, Israel, and possibly Sicily, and actually all over the entire Mediterranean due to the ash layer that's there. The sediment of Akrotiri on the island of Thera was buried in volcanic ash and pumice, which preserved many objects and artwork, first excavated by Spiridon Marinakis in 67. Akrotiri appeared to be a ghost town when the volcano erupted, as no corpses have been discovered, like maybe in Pompeii, where they're in those strange positions and had been trapped, indicating that the population had enough time to excavate the island. Many historians, including Marinatos, believe that Thera was the original inspiration for Plato's Atlantis. And indeed it may have been, and now that they've dug out a lot of it, you can see all of these ancient urns and stuff, but they find very few, if any, bodies versus hundreds and hundreds have been found at Pompeii, and it shows you something different. And this is the site of Akrotiri. There's also one in the North Atlantic, which would have affected North America pretty bad, and Europe, and North Africa, and a channeling running even still into the Mediterranean somewhat. The North Atlantic tsunami of 6100 BC. In prehistoric times, 3 huge landslides occurred underwater on the edge of Norway's continental shelf, causing huge tsunamis in the North Atlantic Ocean. Known as the Storegga Slides, Norwegian for Great Edge, 3 major underwater landslides cause a massive displacement of water. This is the type thing where I'm talking about where a whole section of coast just goes boom into the water at one time. And just like when you're a kid and you splash the thing, it causes quite a bit of surge and movement of water. The first occurred sometime around 30,000 to 50,000 years ago. The second and third occurred about 8,000 years ago. And there's that timeline again, when an area the size of Iceland slid into the Norwegian Sea at one time. Think about that. I wish I could just pull up a picture for you right now, but there's Greenland and there's Iceland, right? And Iceland's smaller, but it's pretty damn huge. Something that size just poof, and it was gone. And then Doggerland and things in that tail, and how a muddy shoal is in that area of Atlantis. It kind of lends an idea, but let's go on. The dimensions were staggering. A basically 180 mile or 290 kilometer stretch of coastal shelf with a total area of 840 cubic miles or 3,500 cubic kilometers caused a massive displacement of water, which impacted the coast of Scotland, Norway, and the Shetlands, and the entire coast up there, and probably across and around the world, and bing-bonging, but mainly in the Atlantic. In Norway, the coast shows evidence of a 33 to 66 foot tall, or 10 to 20 meters tsunami. In Scotland, traces of this tsunami have been recorded, with deposited sediment being discovered in the Firth of Forth, 50 miles inland and 13 feet above normal tide levels. And this would be like the thing that you saw in the Japanese tsunami running up through there. But I believe this also runs off of a fjord and then goes through up into there, so it would have been where it shoved up in that way. Other parts of Britain show an inundation of about 8 feet, which nobody's 8 feet tall. So this caused an extreme problem. I mean, this is, and I think he's got this mixed up too here, because he says in 8 feet to 25 meters. I think he should have been trying to say 25 feet, about 8 meters. Is that more right, guys? Yeah, 25 feet above the water mark. In the Shetland Islands, evidence for this event is widely displayed along with peat cliffs and low-lying valleys. The major force of the tsunami was probably on the exposed headlands, but the greatest inundation was inlets. And I did one video a long time ago that shows this, and it was trying to show that there were localized floods in places, but not exactly the same time, but people were trying to make them the same time. And how that got debunked in a few cases, but it showed ancient floods. This was 3 years ago now. But at the same time, it showed where there was these peat bogs and these layers where they'd been inundated and so much debris on them that they no longer were a peat bog. And so on, and these people finding it, and they were excavating peat bogs and stuff for peat moss and stuff, is for peat type of fertilized land and so on that you are familiar with getting, and what they ran into. And quite often they would run into some odd things. But so the force of the tsunami was exposed on the headlands, but the greatest inundation was on inlets, like I'm talking about, where if it had a chance to come up a delta, then it would just start wreaking havoc because most of those are fairly flat too. And also it seemed to push all the concentration of everything that was trying to come to the whole shore into that area, because everybody, you can go here, let's go here, and it took it on further. The other would splash and recede back, but through these inlets it rushed much further. And that's just what you see in Japan and so on, and through many of these places. There's a video at the end of Storega slide, and I might take a look at it. I haven't even looked at it yet. The Storega slide was first discovered in the late 1983, people, God, when Norwegian scientist Tom Budge studied the underwater displacement and realized it had happened in 3 stages. In the 1980s, Professor Alastair Dawson of the Aberdeen Institute for Coastal Management noticed a very curious layer, as he called it, of sand in the land along the Scottish east coast. And this has to do with golf and the golf lands that are there, and the grass that ended up growing there, that's kind of in that idea of links golf courses and so on. But originally thought of as a storm sediment, he became aware of the Norwegian scientist who had done a study on Storega and realized that the sediments in Scotland were related to this ancient catastrophic event. North Sea with pre-action wiped out by tsunami. Man, here's more of this. North Sea and Highlands sunk by a tsunami. Underwater archaeologists finally find the ruins of Roman city of Neapolis. The comet that sparked a worldwide flood myth. Oh, I'm all over it. So, yeah, here's a look at that peat layering of how there was something going and forming, and then all of a sudden, voila, and you can see how thick of a sediment layer, and then it forms again on top of it, and the layer from then on is more of a bog, or moor, if you will, that type of environment. That is taken at Meryton in the Montrose Basin of Scotland. Let's talk about Indian Ocean tsunamis. And are we getting close to 2? Hey, I might make it. I doubt it. On November 14th, 2006, the New York Times published an article called Ancient Crash Epic Wave about a monstrous tsunami which struck the island of Madagascar circa 4,800 years ago. So almost 300 BC. And that has a correlation with the Sumerian disaster too. And another one recorded by other people near there. Isn't that amazing? So other ones can go along with these flood ideas, and you have the idea of Deucalion and whenever that had happened there, and perhaps that was a different timeline than whenever it happened in Sumeria, but not too much different. And when you look back at thousands of years with the spread and mythology and how it's kept, no one really knows its origins. But we have figured out the Bible has one off the Sumerian tale, and Noah and the birds and everything else. It goes along with his tale, but strangely, Deucalion's story goes along with that, and also has a Moses-ish type concept too. But that also goes along with tales of an Akkadian king who said the same thing happened to him, and that goes along with Nimrod and all these other stories. But let's look at this. Huge wedge-shaped chevron deposits containing sediments from the ocean floor fused with a mixture of metals which are as deep as the Chrysler Building in Manhattan is high and twice the area of Manhattan. I'll repeat that one more time. There's these huge wedge-shaped ripples, which, like I've shown you maybe in some of my videos if you've seen them, like in North America where the giant floods, whenever it destroyed the continental ice shelf and it all poured down, and that Carlson and a lot of these guys have shown where the running through there was causing a rippling effect and scouring the land and causing these river basins, and the way that the Grand Canyon looks, and a lot of these scab lands and things that we hear about, and what that was done. So huge wedge-shaped chevron deposits containing sediments from the ocean floor were fused in with a mixture of metals which are as deep as the Chrysler Building in Manhattan is high and twice the area of the island of Manhattan. These chevrons point in the direction of a newly discovered crater at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, 18 miles in diameter and 12,500 foot below the surface. And the video that I show whenever I do a video and do some Ozzy Osbourne song behind it, Revelation Mother Earth, and there's another one I do a Tool song to the back of that's slowed down, that again does the same thing where it shows this footage of the world being destroyed. It's supposed to have been something along that line, although in the picture it looks like maybe something the size of a softball hitting the earth, and then the earth is just the size of a basketball. In reality, all it took was something the size of a BB versus the earth the size of a basketball to do this effect. In fact, a little smaller than that. But its kinetic energy caused a lot of problems. And that deep too, 3,810 meters deep. It's called Burkle Crater. Burkle Crater was discovered in 2005 by Dr. Dallas Abbott, who estimates it to between 4,500 and 5,000 years old. The obvious explanation is that the large comet or asteroid smashed into the Indian Ocean about 4,800 years ago, or about 2,800 BC. Funny how they give this number, and they did that, but this shows the correlation, producing a monster tsunami at least 600 feet high, 183 meters, is exactly 600 feet, I'm guessing. I don't even think that's right. But where you find this at is that it inundated over here, and there's a place that it goes through, and it shows you, looking at the land, where it inundated it all and then sucked it all back and ruined everything that was in that area. And Burkle Crater's way down here. And so it had hurt Madagascar, all the coast of Africa too, through the Horn. And you can see how this area funnels right here, that it funnels, and so like a funnel to your ear wanting to hear something, it collects that power and it channeled it and ran it right up into that land that was there, and caused a huge problem. Burkle Crater, it's called. While many astronomers are skeptical that the chevrons were created by impact, scientists from the Holocene Impact Working Group are sure that a major impact occurs every millennium, which can leave telltale signs in chevrons. Dr. Abbott uses satellite photography to scan the oceans for telltale signs of deep depressions, such as changes in the ocean surface, which occur when either mountains or depressions are beneath the surface. Dr. Abbott and her team have discovered the chevrons in the Caribbean Ocean, in Scotland, in Vietnam, up in North Korea, and in the North Sea, as well as one on Long Island, New York, and another in Connecticut. With colleagues from Novritsk Tsunami Laboratory in Russia, she visited the huge chevrons on Madagascar to study samples. There they were found to contain tiny fossils from the ocean floor, as well as iron, nickel, and chromium used to the fossils, which points to a chondritic or meteor as the culprit. So in other words, they're saying, well, they can see that it did the expulsion, and it's got maybe micro snails and all these things that are in the sand layer that they found there. But because of the extra nickel and iron and stuff and chrome that's there, it points toward a chondritic meteorite. Dr. Ted Bryant, a geomorphologist from the University of Wollongong, was one of the first scientists to recognize the signatures of mega tsunamis. Such tsunamis leave deposits containing unusual rocks with marine oyster shells, which cannot be explained by natural processes. So you all of a sudden inundate land, you're digging and you find seashells, and you're like, what? Speaking of the Madagascar tsunami, he commented, "No tsunami in the modern world could have made these features. Asa, or Banda Asha, the tsunami off Sumatra, was a dimple. End of the world movies do not capture the size of these waves. Submarine landslides can cause major tsunamis, but they are localized. These are deposited along whole coastlines. So this is not something that's local. This is not something that the river, the Tigris and Euphrates, flooded up so bad it got so many cubits deep. But this is a gigantic tsunami rushing through and enveloping, and anybody that really witnesses it doesn't get to tell about it." Bruce Mass, an environmental archaeologist at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, believes that the comet fell on May 10th, 2807 BC, according to the information contained in many flood myths from around the world, particularly those mentioning a full solar eclipse which occurred on that day. And that has to do with the Sumerian version of the tale of Utnapishtim and so on. And it also has to kind of do with the idea that after this great Phaethon type of sun chariot blazoned across, and it happened to us that God didn't show up again, or the sun god didn't go for a little while, and that maybe it has to do with that concept too. But and the sun going dark definitely meant things to people in elder times. So let's see if this plays. If it doesn't, I'll reset it. Had to reset it, but that's where the tsunami had hit. So let's see what type we can get off of this. Let loose that landslide and it would have pushed out in many directions, but disrupted the continental slope. 8,200 years ago, they're estimating, trying to pin it down exactly now. So it's 2,000 times larger than the Mount St. Helens eruption in Let Loose. Here's a computer simulation of it. Oh, so due to topography, it seemed to have almost been funneled and channeled and made a shotgun out of it to where it goes poof and put it out there. And then it explodes out. Huh. So after 3 hours, they say it slows down and the flow takes half a day to travel 500 kilometers to the deep Atlantic basin. And this is what they can see the scar of right here, where this whole place let loose. "40-meter high waves." And am I going to be able to play it again if I do that?